So my name is Ellen Chang. I'm a local San Diegan. I've been working in space with 20-some years. I started my career in the Navy using space as a user, intelligence officer, all kinds of satellites. And then I ended up being more of an engineering manager, program manager at Northrop Grumman. And then later on, since 2015, I jumped out and started with space startups. At the time, it was called Space 2.0, so now we're still at Space 2.0. But space has evolved quite a bit. It's amazing how much commercial investment has come into space. It's actually started to shift the way the government thinks about investing in space. It's changed NASA's behavior. It's changed Space Force's behavior. It's getting more global, and I think that the decrease of cost has actually made space way more global. So we hope to unpack a lot of these themes over the next 45 minutes. We'll have a 30-minute conversation, and then I'll open it up to the audience here. But please don't be shy, especially if we can get into a very interactive session here. So to start out, I already provided you a little bit about me, but may I ask you, Pinar, to introduce yourself and Axiom Space and everything that you're doing?
Of course. So my name is Pinar Messi. I'm a senior program manager at Axiom Space. I've been at Axiom Space for 2.5 years now, and prior to that I was in academia. I had a little bit of an unusual way of starting working in the space industry. I was at UC San Diego, a researcher working on human brain organoids, trying to understand the impact of microgravity on human brain development. And that project led me to getting to know some people in the space industry. And then when academia was not working the way I hoped so, I made the transition to the space industry. So right now what I'm doing at Axiom Space is not necessarily, I'm going to tell a little bit about the company as well, but basically I'm in charge of a portfolio of biomedical research programs that are geared towards understanding if any of them can benefit from being manufactured in space to help life on Earth. So really trying to identify what are those, what it's for cancer research, trying to make a drug that is only, that we can only make in space, or a disease model that we're not, hello? Okay. Disease model that we're not able to really accomplish here on Earth because maybe the timelines are too, taking too long or something like that. So I can get into those research too, but maybe we can talk a little bit more a little bit later. And back onto the Axiom Space side, so we're building, our bread and butter is really building the next commercial space station, the one that's going to be the successor to the International Space Station that is going to be decommissioned at the end of the decade. We are the sole company that has the access to directly dock onto the International Space Station, and then eventually we're going to become a free flyer. But in addition to that, while we're building our space station, we have been also conducting private astronaut missions, because our mission is really to make space accessible to everyone. So that includes private citizens, but also countries that may or may not have space programs. To date, we actually have already conducted 3 of those, and today's actually our anniversary of the AX3 mission that launched last year. And our AX4 mission is coming up in no earlier than April 2025. And in addition to that, we also have the contract to make the next generation spacesuit that maybe some of you guys have seen, because it's in collaboration with Prada. I know that a lot of people got interested because of that. It looks quite cool, so I highly recommend you guys check it out. And we are also working with Astrolab on a lunar terrain vehicle.
Thank you. Thanks for the overview. Jeff, how about you, from JPL and also your history in terms of your career?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Jeff McGivern. I work up at Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. So I grew up in Florida, though. I grew up across the river from Kennedy Space Center. So maybe you found your way eventually into space. I've always been in the space program. That's the way I think about it anyway. So I grew up watching launches. We could see them from our backyard. So I moved out to LA after undergrad to work at Rocketdyne developing rocket engines. While I was in undergrad, I co-opted or interned out at NASA Kennedy Space Center, working for the Launch Services Program. The Launch Services Program is responsible for all of the expendable or satellite launch vehicles. About 7 years ago, I moved from Rocketdyne to JPL to work on the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. I led some of the development activities for the sample caching system, so it's the big robotic arm and the core, all of the mechanisms that collect cores on Mars, and we've collected about half of our total amount of samples on Mars so far. So we took up 42 sample tubes, we filled 20 of them, 24, and dropped 12 of them on the surface. Yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah, it's awesome. So I currently lead an organization called Materials Development, Testing, and Failure Investigations. We manage the materials labs at JPL. So we engage in industry, in different flavors of collaborations with industry to either characterize new materials or most recently, we worked with a company up in San Francisco called Planet Labs. Planet Labs images the Earth, and we designed and developed a carbon plume mapper for them. And the way we set up there is we did all the design and development. We built the first two, and then Planet Lab we're delivering the design to Planet Lab, and Planet Lab is then building the remaining 48 or so, or however many they're going to build. So that's one way that we interact with industry. Other ways are through, so NASA has a RFP process called Roses. And so Roses is where all of the proposal calls are posted, and there's a subset of Roses that are looking for industry partnerships and so it's a requirement for JPL. We're not a government agency, but we're controlled by a variety of government mechanisms because of our contract with NASA to interact with, so there's a subset of those proposals that require us to interact with industry to develop a certain tech, take certain technologies from low TRLs to high TRLs, technology readiness levels if you're not in the engineering side of things. And so we get the opportunity to see a large cross-section of mission potentials and early tech.
Thanks for that. Very interesting background. Drew.
Hey everyone, my name is Drew Busby, call sign Murph. If you want the story behind that, you have to buy me a beer. That's how that works. Similar to Ellen, I come from a national security background. I was an Air Force and then Space Force officer. Did the nuke mission, so I sat in a bunker ready to push a big red button. Fun fact for the day is it's not a big red button, it's 3 switches and a key. So take that to trivia. So did that for about 3 years. Got the opportunity to either go to Montana or Minot, North Dakota. As someone from the South, I hate the snow, so I politely declined, applied for cross-training, came out here to LA to be an acquisitions officer. At the time, it was Space and Missile Systems Center. So as a nuke bubba, I thought I was going to work on GBSD and work on the Sentinel program. Very quickly found out that missile was just in the name. And they told me to go figure out space. I got put on a very, very ragtag team. Lieutenant colonel that had been passed over for ML, and then another lieutenant did not know what we were doing, but that organization spun up what is now called SpaceWorks. It's the innovation arm of the U.S. Space Force. We took a budget that was $0 that we had to beg, borrow, and steal just to get, to now close to $500 million that's doled out to startups every single year via the SBIR, STTR portfolio. So I've been doing that for the better part of a couple years. I got off active duty about a year ago. I'm now at an organization called DTI. I'm our COO. We have what is called a PIA, a Partnership Intermediary Agreement with SpaceWorks. But we're a nonprofit. We run an accelerator program. I have now a 21,000 square foot collaboration facility where we welcome startups. We do programming, of course, run the accelerator. The accelerator is called I2A. It's no cost, no equity. It's on the back of the SpaceWorks Phase 2 challenges. So you get a $2 million specific topic. You get a 24-month period of performance on a contract, and you get me and my team for 12 weeks of dedicated support. And we continue to support you through the life cycle of that vehicle. Since we started that program in February, we've gone on to do $1.28 billion in follow-on government contracts for our portfolio, $535 million in venture investment, and $125 million in commercial. Again, all non-dilutive capital that we provide either through SpaceWorks mechanisms or the non-equity, non-compensation support that we give the companies as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to come back to you, Pinar. You mentioned some of the biotech research and in microgravity. I mean, how are you getting that funded? Who funds that type of research?
Yeah, so we are well, there's actually two different ways that we can look at it. So we are doing the private astronaut missions, so that's usually with different governments around the world. So those folks come to us by research that is usually government funded or through their space program, or and we help them select some of those. But for the in-space manufacturing portfolio that I'm managing, our projects are mainly supported by NASA and ISS National Lab grants. However, because of some of the progress that we've made, and also if you are familiar with how ISS has been used so far, so there was a whole decade of research, but now everyone's talking about starting to have results. So it's the decade of results, because we're finally getting really where microgravity can really enhance products or make better, I don't know, semiconductors, for instance, or different types of materials, protein crystallization, or other types of products. So now other agencies are also starting to get interested in the space arena. And actually, we have partnered with the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine, and together we had applied to a National Science Foundation grant. It's basically a regional workforce development grant that we obtained. It's $160 million over 10 years. And within that grant, one of the pillars of it was purely focused on in-space manufacturing and microgravity research. So we can see that other agencies are starting to see also the benefit of doing microgravity research. But yeah, it's been a slow process.
So maybe, given that there's some 10 years of, I guess, data, what do we see in terms of the benefits of microgravity?
Yeah, so on the advanced materials side, there's actually a little bit more data on that. So for instance, for fiber optics, they're much better made and longer and all those things in microgravity. On the bio side, it's a little bit less clear what actually benefits from microgravity. And that's mainly due to the fact that the current process until now has been a little bit tricky. On Earth, when you're doing experiments on the bench, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with academic research, but or even in biotech research, but when you do an experiment and you have a certain result, you get to repeat it multiple times. You get statistical significance, and then others can verify it. When you want to do a research in space, that's actually much more complicated, because the resources that we have, the number of launch vehicles that we have, the space that we have to do those experiments are actually very limited. So what typically happens, or used to happen, is you would go to space, you would do your experiment, and then there's not a lot of instruments in space to get real-time on-orbit data, so you don't know your results until they come back, and then you get to analyze it for months, and then you have to go back in line to go back to space. This is also mainly due to the fact that, I mean, of course, NASA partners are amazing to keeping the crew alive and making sure that everything works perfectly. But that also means that whenever we are designing an experiment, it's locked in before it goes to space, months before it actually launches. So that actually leaves very little room to changing things or adapting some of your research that you might be doing in parallel on the ground, and you found something new, but because the safety reviews from NASA, the deadlines have already passed, you cannot make any changes. But what we are seeing on our side, because the commercial companies are coming in this whole space arena, now we're trying to change some of these processes, try to make them a little bit faster, and also increase the cadence of doing research, like being able to repeat it multiple times. And actually in this, in order to make this a little bit more robust, NASA has come up with this program called In-Space Production Applications. And those grants are really towards they're multi-phase grants, But basically, the first phase is to really look at the proof of concept. So whatever you're working on, is there real benefit? And in order to do that, you actually get multiple flights. So you can actually repeat your experiment and iterate your experiment. In the second phase, then you go to pilot scale manufacturing, and then eventually to full scale manufacturing if it's a manufacturing grant, for instance. And to just go back to your first, I know that it has been like a very long part, but I just wanted to mention all these different hurdles that we had to change or adapt to. So some of the things that we're interested right now are, for instance, stem cells, because stem cells have a huge potential here on Earth for therapeutic applications, either for patients who may have neurological disorders or some other disorders that do not have any cures, but you need replacement of those cells that are dying, perhaps. So they have a lot of potential, but they're still very costly and very it's not a very efficient process on Earth. So one of the things that we're looking is whether going to microgravity would actually make that simpler or most cost efficient, so we can help patients faster. Some of the other things that we're looking into are bioprinting, 3D bioprinting, so tissue bioprinting as building blocks for organs. So if you're thinking of organ transplantation, for instance, so that could be something that could help. We have another project that is quite exciting. It's also about blood stem cell manufacturing, so that could help answer the the blood shortage, the blood donation shortage that we usually always have. Some of the other things that we're looking are cancer research. So how can we model tumor growth or cancer growth better in order to be able to intervene earlier, or also develop those drugs that maybe when we do them in microgravity, they might be much more beneficial to the patient rather than here on Earth, because as you guys probably know, most of the clinical trials, they fail at 90-95%. So microgravity could be the answer to some of those.
Yeah, I guess the drug companies, it takes $1 billion to develop a drug anyway, so they might as well try to play around with microgravity. There's a couple companies that I know are trying to solve the feedback loop problem, like Space Tango, like actually build labs that communicate directly, so you don't have to keep launching, and a few others. So for the investors in the crowd here, there's a few companies trying to solve
When I was in the UCSD, actually, I was working with Space Tango, so I'm very familiar with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're still
good. Yeah, and then San Diego itself, just Salk Institute and Sanford Burnham all have microgravity. I guess I've seen them invest in that. So Jeff, I'm going to pull on the thread here. We're going from bio to kind of materials. And I wanted to, I'm very interested in materials just because, we have this additive manufacturing kind of revolution starting. How does your work actually inform either space or even the additive revolution? If you can talk to that.
Sure, yeah. So within, I guess I'll speak to additive specifically first. So within NASA, over the past decade, we've been really looking at how do we refine the approach to quality inspections, NDE, non-destructive evaluations. How do we understand that the part we built is both the part we designed and a reliable part? And so to answer those kinds of questions, about 5 years ago, it was released in 2020. I used the COVID time dilation. Anyway, so is NASA standard 6030, so 6030. And within that, it has a bunch of test requirements, inspection requirements, and really to provide a framework for NASA institutions, but also for industry that wants to fly additive manufactured parts, a framework to get from an idea to get from a powder configuration if you're using powder metallurgy, and get to a final part that is safe to fly and reliable when you do fly it. So in my labs, we do a bunch of the characterization. So we partner with the additive manufacturing equipment, and the additive manufacturing organization at JPL is on our shop floor. It's on our operations side. So we partner with our operations to figure out what combination of materials need to go into, what the parameters are in the machine, and then when those parameters come out, when those parts come out, we build coupons, and we mechanically test those coupons, and we do inspections on them to make sure that we understand that the parts we're building are parts that we can fly. And On the Europa Clipper mission that launched in October, we had a series of brackets that were additively manufactured, and that gets us to TRL level 9, right? Gets us to something that's flying, something that's operating, and something that's on its way to another planet, and really reflects the reliability and the potential for additive manufactured parts. In not additive manufacturing areas, we work on a lot of coatings and paints. So something that tends to be important for us are thermal optical properties. So emissivity and absorptivity. We usually want something to either be super black or super white because we either want to absorb all the heat or reflect all the heat. And so looking for approaches to adhesion, because usually when you have something that is in one of those extremes, the ability for that paint to stick to the surface becomes a problem because you have to fill it with pigment. And when you fill it with pigment, it means you aren't filling it with a binder, you aren't filling it with an adhesive. And so are you all familiar with Vanta Black, the super black? You can make a basketball disappear. So we're interested in that approach. The problem with Vanta Black is exactly that. It's very fragile. And so in handling and moving through payload integration and moving through launch, if you lose half of your paint, now not only do you have a surface that isn't black, but also you have FOD all over your spacecraft. And most instruments on JPL missions have strict contamination control or cleanliness requirements. And in the cases of interplanetary missions like Perseverance rover, we have planetary protection requirements. So we don't want to bring something from Earth to that planet and then measure something on the planet, and say, oh, there's life, but it's actually just something we brought from Earth. And in the case of Perseverance, Perseverance is the first phase of the Mars sample return mission or campaign. And if we're going to bring those samples back, we don't want to take something to Mars, collect it in a sample, store it on the rover, bring it back to Earth, put it in a lab on Earth, open the seal, pull out a rock that has Earth germs or Earth bacteria on it, and say, oh, Earthlings are already there, to make those kinds of claims.
Is that where all the rumors come from?
Yeah, that's where all the rumors come from. Panels like this, when I throw those things out, it's just that soundbite. And so looking at ways to prevent coatings from flaking off and improving adhesion and doing all that. And so we support that kind of development work in my labs.
Great. And then I'm going to flip over to Drew. One more question around some of the kind of acceleration work that you do. Like how are you seeing the types of companies working with SpaceWorks change or evolve? Like, can you explain the mix?
Sure, I'll do my best. So I think probably 5-ish years ago, like the work that we started, we literally were walking down Venice Beach in full ABUs to meet with companies, which, by the way, is a terrible idea. Do not do that. You get all kinds of wrong attention. So, I mean, at the time, like we very much had to go out into the ecosystem and say, hey, have you considered working with the Department of Defense, at the time the Air Force or now the Space Force? Hey, would you apply for a SBIR or can we help you? That's definitely completely flipped. We are now seeing much more activity in terms of companies that are looking at the Department of Defense and specifically the Space Force as they kind of build out their tech roadmap, right? They see the Department of Defense or the federal kind of environment as a solid customer that they want to pursue. Now, in terms of some of the solutions that we're seeing, very early on, it was a lot of things around launch. We did have some additive manufacturing, but a lot of it was about reusable launch and things like that. Now what we're starting to see is a lot more things around like active debris removal, RPO considerations, what it means to do like ISAM and OSAM, and then very much getting on out. I will say that you have seen probably an evolution, and it's probably more of the pendulum. Right? For a while, we were very focused on small sats and CubeSats, and now you have like companies like Astronauts that are building much larger constellations and much larger buses, and we're seeing that too through some of the companies that are coming through our portfolio. Now, in terms of the funding landscape, to give you guys context, the way that the DAF, so the Air Force and Space Force, leverages SBIR is through what's called an open topic and specific topic. About 5-6 years ago, we very, very much leveraged a lot of open topic calls because we frankly didn't know what we didn't know. So we had to ask for, hey, if you're thinking about something in space, please submit it so we can consider it. That is starting to shift, in my opinion. You're starting to see a lot more specific topics. So there are specific calls for technology. And the way that has looked over the last year or so, we've done tactically responsive space being one, meaning if there is something that happens on orbit, we need to be able to respond within 24 hours. That could be an event, that could be a collision, that could be worst case scenario, that could be stuff we have to go into a special room and talk about, all of those things. We've done alternative PNTs. So if you use GPS here, what happens if GPS isn't working, or when you're on the highway and it says there's a police car here and you slow way down and there's no police car? What are alternatives to that? And then also digital spaceport of the future. So what does it mean to have both a commercial and military spaceport? Seeing more and more, not only the military leveraging launch and trying to get things in orbit, but our commercial partners as well.
Thanks for that. I think that's a good segue into kind of this civil space and military space kind of intersection. I'm at least in my observation, I'm seeing, at least here, the investment landscape, especially the Silicon Valley investment landscape, really pivoting into national security. I mean, I'd love to get a soundbite from each of you. Like, what do you see? Is that necessary? Is that necessary? I mean, are we actually seeing kind of a bifurcation inside in the global world, or not? Pinar.
I think there's a lot of people from different industries that are starting to get really interested. At least I'm going to answer that on my side, like companies that may not have typically a space interest, they're starting to come into that and invest in that as well. So that is, there's some biotech, but we're hoping for more, because the whole point of also having human presence in low Earth orbit is to be able to also support later on missions in Moon and Mars. But in order to do that, once ISS is decommissioned, we have to have multiple platforms and low Earth orbit economy. And in order to be able to have all of that, we need humans working and living in space. And for working, we need to have things to do. So in-space manufacturing is actually could be one of those. So we're hoping that some of those companies are also going to be more and more interested to have like a space strategy, even if it's a non-traditional type company.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, so civil and military space, especially in the United States, has been integrated since the conquest of space was a topic. And so, Scott Carpenter flew on the top of an ICBM, that kind of things. And so, let's see, a lot of the funding potential for new tech and new R&D for civil applications does tend to have roots in military applications, especially in optics and controls and advanced approaches to all that. There's definitely an integrated, what am I trying to say here? Integrated concepts and people. People. So at JPL, we are mostly civil space. We are mostly building landers and orbiters and spacecraft to explore the universe and expand society's consciousness about who we are and where we come from. There is a small percentage of work that is driven by the military and is driven by what instruments we can build that don't necessarily end up on a JPL mission. What instruments can we build that might end up on a spacecraft with a military purpose? And so, especially in the United States, again, the way that we work, it almost demands that there's an integration between military and civil space.
Yeah, I'll pull that thread, and maybe Drew, you can jump in. But I do know that General Saltzman, who's in charge of the Space Force, from an operational perspective, did not want to admit that he had to worry about defending space assets until like this year. Yeah. And then it's like, shit, we actually have people who want to actually shoot down our satellites and stuff like that, right? So it's a thing. Mm-hmm. So Drew, would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how do I say this? China and Russia are organizations and companies or countries that rhyme with Ina and Usha, have demonstrated that they do have those capabilities, right? We've seen China do an ASAT demonstration that caused the ISS to relocate orbit. We've seen things that, and this is all public, and I'm being very conscious of that because I don't want to go to jail. But like we've seen, Russia demonstrate like their nesting doll capabilities. Like those are very, very real threats. And so, we do have an instance where commercial innovation in space outpaces the federal. However, there are large buckets of federal funding for that. I think the buzzword over the last 5-6 years has been dual use. I think it's gotten, I don't want to say overused. I think people phrase it different ways. What I would say is when you approach dual use, it doesn't have to be 50-50, and I think a lot of people make that mistake. So there are plenty of companies that maybe have a mostly commercial use case, but then are able to leverage the federal government to do that. And us on the DoD or the defense side, we want to see that because there is a call for, buy, build, exploit. Meaning, we want to buy, the product, good, or service. If you're a commercial entity and we can like hitch a ride or do things like that, we're interested in that as well. And then our very, very last thing that we want to do is develop it in-house. So it's very much a real use case. I think you're going to see, traditional, non-space companies have to roll out a space strategy. Like if anyone watches the PGA Tour, that little overview that they give you of the golf course, that's space. That is a military satellite, all these things, GPS, all of that kind of fun stuff. So you're going to see that kind of continue to go forward, I think, over the next few years as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to open up to at least one broad question, and then we'll get involve the audience here. So the elephant in the room really is AI. So how do you see AI impacting what you're doing in space?
So, well, of course, AI, I think, is going to be more and more involved in everything that we do, including space stations and things, data interpretation. On my side, for instance, we generate tons of data, and we're hoping that once we have our station, we're going to be, at least on the biological side, have more and more data generated in space. So we will need to analyze those in real time and to be able.
Are you guys starting to build those models or using some of that right now?
One example that I was going to give that our company is doing is actually we're also building our own orbital data centers. So not only that's going to be able to house the data storage and things like that, but also I think one thing that downfall, I don't know if you guys were going to talk about this, but AI is obviously consuming a lot of water, generating a ton of heat. So there's definitely a huge benefit in having orbital data centers and AI being operated more from space rather than having
seeing a lot of pitch decks
here on Earth. So I think that's one of the things that in my personal opinion, one of the most important part of being able to utilize space in AI. That will still help us building that in our models and help developing things faster, but at the same time not consume more water here on Earth.
Jeff?
Yeah, so at JPL we've used AI of some flavor for a long time now. One example is when the Curiosity rover and more recently the Perseverance rover land on Mars. So we enter the atmosphere, it pops the heat shield, blows a parachute, and then between the parachute and the sky crane, which is what ultimately lowers the rover to the surface, there's a function on the spacecraft that is determining final landing place. So it's determining rock positions. It's determining the ability to land flat. It's determining where after the rover is dropped on the ground, the sky crane blasts away. So it is determining, is there a path for the sky crane to fly away that doesn't impact the rover? It takes 7 minutes for a signal to get from Earth to Mars and 7 minutes for that signal to get from Mars back to Earth. So the landing sequence is 7 minutes long. We call it the 7 minutes of terror because we don't know if it's landed or not until it has landed or not. And so all of that decision making and final landing, the rover's doing that. That's all algorithms. That's AI. The rover is making those decisions. And after it lands today, we just tell the rover we look ahead and we say this is but there is interesting potential in this region of Mars or this region of this crater. We want the rover to go here. The rover figures out how to get there. the rover, we call them HAZ cams. They're hazardous cameras. They look for rocks and look for paths to go. And the rover is plotting its own path and driving on its own. So now we've clocked miles and miles and miles of self-driving that the rover is doing. And we use those kinds of things across our spacecraft fleet. So in data analysis, it's big in data analysis. What's newer at JPL are how these large language models impact our potential to document things, impact our potential to write procedures, impact our potential to pull lessons learned out of the myriad of lessons learned databases that we have at JPL and at NASA, and how can large language models enable us to do that? And so that's on the more recent side of what we've been looking at.
Yeah, that's great. Have you heard of something called physical AI at all? No? Okay. It's actually using, we can talk offline, but that's
Cool.
actually an interesting trend to help the design aspect. Drew, any comments?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was active duty when it came down that you will not use AI to write your OPRs. Now, 3-4 years later, right? Yeah, don't use ChatGPT to write your OPR, Lieutenant Snuffy. We know that you used it. But now that's kind of flipped, right? We're seeing more and more some of that digital spaceport of the future, some of that work was geared towards how do we use AI. I think what you're going to see relatively soon is folks using it around things like object avoidance, collision detection, things like that on orbit for military purposes. If you're unaware, like if you launch a satellite, there's a finite number of moves that you can make. So limiting, the unnecessary moves and things like that. I also think that you are going to start to see more around object detection and what that might be, as well as some potential defensive capabilities, right? I mentioned Russia and China. We know that there's capabilities out there of I guess kind of a nature where they're going to go take pictures, see what we got up there, things like that. I think you're going to see AI start to get involved in how do we kind of counteract some of that activity, spoofing, jamming, things like that as well.
Thank you. Anyone have other questions? Yes.
What particularly excites you about like some of the developments in the commercial space race in the last few years? Anything?
Let me repeat so we can get it on the recording. What particularly excites you in the commercial space race over the last few years?
Well, on my side, many things. One is being able to give access to a lot of people all around the world to be able to go to space. And some of the things that I've seen happen after once these people have gone there, and then the collaborations that are happening between different countries. So I'm just going to give 2 examples. One holds dear to my heart because I'm also Turkish and French. But when the Turkish astronaut went, and I was at the launch at Kennedy Space Center, and that was a feeling that I don't know if I can even express, but how it was. But growing up, I didn't grow up with launches or things like that. Like in Turkey, we don't have any of those things. It wasn't even shown on the TV or anything. And I was born after, moon landing and everything, but kind of like too early for everything else and shuttle missions and all that. We didn't have any of those. So, seeing someone Turkish actually going to the International Space Station, that was a whole other feeling for me personally. So that was one thing. And the other one that I can give the example, during our AX2 mission, we flew the first Arab woman, Rayana Barnawi, and she did absolutely amazing on orbit. She's a biologist, so all the experiments that she did, it was so seamless. I personally do not want to go to space because I already have, I'm afraid of roller coasters and things like that. But seeing her, how easily she was doing all these things at the bench, and myself being a biologist, I was like, well, maybe I could do this. She makes it look so easy. But then since she came back, they have started doing a lot of workshops in their countries, and she really became an idol to the whole Middle East as a woman as well. And they have actually come to UC San Diego when we were doing our annual stem cell symposium during a panel. And during that time, I also introduced her to a couple of the other teams of whom she had done the experiments during the AX2 mission, but they had never met each other actually. But she ended up being on their peer review publications, so that interaction was amazing as well. And of course, on my scientist hat, I mean, just seeing the newer results, things that we've never really seen before, as far as, cancer research, the drug treatment screenings, or the nanomaterials that we make in space. I mean, all those discoveries that I'm seeing, I can't wait for the next 5 years and to see what comes out of the research done in space.
So when the space shuttle program was pitched as the space transportation system, part of the pitch is that the space shuttle would launch 100 times a year. The biggest year for the space shuttle was 12 times. So something that really excites me about commercial space is the number of launches, which infinitely increases our access. So kind of what you're saying, it truly enables new research and new understandings and new access. And along with that number of launches, it enables us to do other kinds of commercial space. It enables the CLIPS missions. So these are a series of commercial lunar missions that are going to the moon to do different kinds of R&D and prove out different tech, which is critical to NASA's Moon to Mars initiatives. So the big campaign of developing how we get back to the moon, how we build a lunar gateway in cislunar orbit, and then with that technology established, how do we bring it to Mars? It's enabled by the number of launches that we can do commercially, the number of spacecraft that we can launch commercially, and the tech that we're developing in partnership with commercials.
Yeah, I think I'm in line with you. I think the more commercial space develops, I think we're getting very much into an actual reality where you can actually have a job literally in space. I also think from a workforce development, the fact that more commercial space emerges, we start to have more folks in space overall, and folks that maybe haven't considered space as a place for them before. Everything from technical folks, trade work, all the way to advanced PhDs. And I know I sit on this panel as the military guy in the corner talking about doom and gloom and fighting and all that kind of stuff. But I also think the more that we get into space, there is a much stronger call for international partnerships. Even in the defense side, space has always kind of been this benign environment, and we realize it's slowly not becoming. So some of those partnerships are starting to strengthen. So I think in terms, I'm a nuke bubba in terms of deterrence. I think the more we are in space and the more we are building, I think you're going to have those stronger international ties, and it's going to be kind of better for us overall, if that makes sense.
You have to double down on that. I think, at least I see a lot of collaboration between the Japanese and the Koreans and all of Europe, and we're starting to share a lot more too. So I think I'm very hopeful in that. Anyone else? Other questions? Yes, you, sir.
Yeah, everyone's obviously talking about SpaceX and everything they're doing, and then we don't really hear a lot about Rocket Lab, but everything that they've accomplished is so impressive. But internationally, what are you guys seeing as far as reusability, from foreign companies? Is anyone kind of emerging as a competitor to SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and the rest?
Let me repeat the question. So the question was about reusability, basically launch and land the launcher and go again. Anyone out internationally doing that?
So you nailed it with the Rocket Lab. Internationally, Rocket Lab is leading the way, and that ESA, the European Space Agency, it's a network of nation states and the different organizations in those nation states to support the objectives. Tends to be more focused on the spacecraft side and on integrating with existing launch vehicles, and so there isn't. From my perspective, there isn't much innovation in the reusability side for European launchers. In the Russian side, Roscosmos tends to launch it and forget it, and so isn't too worried about reusability. China does some amount of that, although they're so secretive about what they're actually doing, it's unclear how much they're actually reusing. The NASA is a pretty strong partner with JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, and JAXA just started launching a new family of launch vehicles that leverages a little more reusability. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. You.
Yeah, what's your outlook on the space mining industry? That's where both national security comes into play because now you're trying to acquire natural resources, and you can build supply chains in space to help facilitate manufacturing in space. And so, what's your outlook on that ecosystem and its development right now?
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat. Go ahead. We have like a couple minutes.
Yeah, so on space mining, it's limitless, right? There's asteroids of platinum. We have a spacecraft going to Psyche, which is Psyche 16. It's one of the asteroids in the asteroid belt. We believe it's mostly nickel. So being able to go to these places and mine these materials, rare earth materials, the potential is limitless, but the tech is hard. The tech is really hard. How do you get an operational mine? How do you maintain it? What does downtime mean on an asteroid? So I think we're a long way away from being able to functionally and operationally mine, but the resources are really interesting, and the potential is really, really interesting. But
I
the tech is
think
super hard.
we could probably start grabbing some of that stuff and bring it back probably within the next 5 to 10 years. But the processing aspect is the hard part. We have enough rare earth here on Earth. We don't have processing in this country. Drew?
No, I was just going to say, I forget his name, the CEO of Astroforge, says, we are binary. It either works or it doesn't. I think 15 years ago, we were 15 years away from space mining, and now we're probably
Deep
another...
space industries.
Yeah, now we're
Anybody
another
remember
15
them?
years away. It does have national security implications. What I said earlier about some of the stuff around active debris removal, a lot of that underlying technology of like what we need to do to be able to land and do all of that, we on the defense side are investing in that. Asteroid mining isn't necessarily a defense use case, is national security. It isn't necessarily a defense use case yet. But with that, we are funding some of that technology. We're not quite there yet. I do think what's going to happen is it's going to be we're not there, and then somebody is there. And
Overnight success.
Yeah, and then they're going to be great, and I'm going to hopefully stay at their pool house and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah.
Well, let's give the panelists a round of applause.